Hi everyone, it's David from ALP, Certified Machinery and Equipment Appraiser. We get a lot of regular questions here from people that call in or send emails, and we decided to create a series of short videos to answer some of the most frequent questions that we receive here. So today we're going to talk about what exactly a USPAP-Compliant machinery and equipment appraisal looks like. What is the end product that you get or your banker will receive when you engage us to evaluate the equipment in a business. So first of all, let me say that we're members of the NEBB Appraisal Institute. All of us here at ALP hold the CMEA designation. That stands for Certified Machinery and Equipment Appraiser. We're bound by a strict code of ethics that you can find a copy of on our website. And we're based in Moncton. We serve people throughout the Maritimes. The code of ethics basically is set up and designed to ensure that our primary motivation is to make sure that we deliver a proper number, a proper value when we're hired to do an appraisal, and make sure that we are never found to be in some sort of conflict of interest between the bank or the user of the appraisal and the person who hired us to do the work. So for example, if you call us up because you want us to do an appraisal of some equipment in a business and that report is going to your banker, we're going to ask for full payment in advance when we show up to inspect the equipment, so that at any point in time in the future after we deliver that report to the bank, we can demonstrate that we were never under any duress or pressure from you to deliver a certain value. Because sometimes that question comes up. People will say, well, were you asked to deliver a certain value, or did they tell you that they needed a certain amount of appraisal value to get the loan they were looking for? And we can honestly say, no, we were paid in full in advance, and our only desire is to get the proper value. This is a picture of us. That's me on the right-hand side. So what's the difference between the work that we do as certified appraisers and something that you might get from a dealer? Because if you were to buy, for example, a restaurant and you wanted to have the restaurant equipment appraised, you might call up a restaurant equipment dealer and say, I want you to come in and do an appraisal here. And they might use the term appraisal. In fact, what that document would end up being actually is what we call a dealer opinion of value. And what the dealer typically will do is they'll come in, they'll make a list of everything that they find, and they'll put down their opinion of what the value is based on their own experience, maybe what's happening in the local market. The dealer typically, though, is conflicted, because most equipment dealers have an interest in future dealings with either the buyer or seller of the equipment. I once had a banker tell me that he felt very nervous about loaning money to a trucking company based on the value of transport trucks that they owned, knowing that the guy who had written up the appraisal on those trucks was going to be trying to sell those guys more trucks next week. It either creates a conflict or the perception that there could be a conflict. Dealers are business people. They're in the business of selling their wares, and many of them have no specific training or affiliations, or any are bound by a code of ethics for doing appraisal work. On the CMEA side, the people who have a certification, we follow the USPAP guidelines, which is the uniform standard for professional appraisal practice. Every capital item that we look at for an appraisal is researched, and we apply either a market or a depreciation method. And all of that data is kept so that if we ever had to defend this value in a court of law or to a lender in the future, we would be able to produce our work and demonstrate how we arrived at a certain value. That can be critically important because the value of machinery and equipment can change in a relatively short period of time. And I'll give you an example just off the top of my head. Brake presses that are used for bending metal. You could have someone who would have paid $10,000 for a brake press of a certain tonnage. and maybe they bought that equipment in 2006. And if you ask them 2 years later, what do you think that's worth? They would have said, well, I bought it for $10,000 and maybe it's depreciated a little bit. Let's say it's worth $8,000, and that's a perfectly legitimate thought for someone to have. Okay, but what that person doesn't know is that in 2008, a whole bunch of businesses in Michigan that supply the auto industry went bankrupt, and the market was flooded with those types of pieces of metalworking equipment. And you could have had that brake press. You could have bought it near Detroit for $2,500, and maybe for another $1,500 or $2,000 had it shipped to the Maritimes. So that piece of equipment probably fell in value by half, and it had nothing to do with that piece of equipment. It had to do with the availability of so many more pieces of equipment that came onto the market due to conditions completely outside of what a business person in this region might know. The value has to be defensible in court and backed by data. The appraiser's only interest is in the appraisal document and his reputation. Our only job is to make sure that we can stand behind the value that we put in there, and we are held to task by our institute and a code of ethics. So let's take a look at one of these appraisals and see what exactly it looks like. And we can start off here by looking at the cover page. And then we get into the transmittal letter. So this is a letter addressed, in this case it was addressed to a banker, saying that they could use this report and the purpose of the report and the type of value that we researched for them. There's then a table of contents. If you can make it out up here, you'll see that this document is 56 pages long. This is a shorter one, actually. So there's a table of contents. We then have general information where we define what exactly an appraisal is and the methodology and thought behind an appraisal task. A summary of salient facts. Then we have the scope of work, where we talk about what exactly we have done. That goes on for a few pages. We then get into describing exactly what the extent of our data research is, the extent of our research into physical or economic factors, the degree to which we inspect the property, the depth of inspection. We talk about who the user is. There's a confidentiality clause here, the intended use. We then get into our statement of limiting conditions, and this goes on for several pages. There's 33 items. We then define our definitions of condition. So every piece of capital equipment that we look at, we're going to give one of 5 different conditions to that piece of equipment, and they're all defined here in the document. We then define the value that we're using for this appraisal. So in this case, it's fair market value in continued use, which means that what is the value of this equipment in the market given the fact that the buyer is going to use the equipment where it is already installed and delivered to continue the same going concern that the seller was undertaking. So not only are we looking at the fair value of the equipment, we're also considering that there's a value in installation and freight to get the equipment there put in place. A great example of this would be a pizza oven in a pizzeria restaurant. So the oven itself is worth something, but in a lot of cases, the oven hood above it and the cost of installing the gas and the ventilation could be worth as much as the oven. So if you were going to buy that oven to remove it, it would have one value to you. If you were buying that oven because you wanted to keep using it where it was already installed, then it's obviously worth more to you. Here is a complete list of all the different value definitions that we use as CMEAs. And there's actually 4 different fair market value definitions. So before we undertake an assignment, we will actually talk to the lender that you're dealing with to get the exact scenario and determine which definition of value is the appropriate one in your case. And some of these lead to higher values and some of these lead to lower values. In total, there are 12 different definitions that we use. We then explain the method of the evaluation, our different methodologies, and then we talk about the reasoning and the analysis, and we cite all of the sources that we contact in our research of the capital items. We then talk about additional considerations, and sometimes there are special considerations that we include here. And we talk about estimated exposure and marketing time if the equipment were to be sold. We then have comments regarding capital equipment, and finally the capital equipment list. This is a list of all of the larger pieces of equipment. So this was a grocery store, and as you can see, we've got meat coolers and frozen food coolers and meat cases and checkout tables, etc. These larger items are referred to as the capital items. They're all listed by make, model, serial number, condition, remaining useful life, comments, etc., and they're each evaluated separately. The full methodology of our training goes into these capital items. We do, however, also include the smaller items. So on the next page, we talk about the shop support and ancillary items, and these are all the small pieces of equipment, and we evaluate them in bulk. We give one price for them as a group. We don't use the same methodology for the small pieces of equipment. It just wouldn't make sense for us to put 2 hours of research and time into a 40-foot step ladder. The value just isn't there. So we use different methods that are more expedient, but in aggregate, when you're looking at a large group of or a large quantity of pieces of equipment or tools, it does give us a usable piece of data, a usable value. We then look at furniture, fixtures, and equipment, and electronic support items as well in bulk. And in the final value summary, we reconcile which methodologies were primarily considered for the capital items, and we also add up and summarize all of the other values. We then have our appraiser's certificate, where we certify to 11 different points, and our qualifications. We then get into a list of all the different kinds of businesses that CMEAs appraise as far as equipment goes, and then we get into the addenda. There's a glossary of terms that are found in the report that we include. We then also include a copy of the engagement agreement, the contract between us and the people who hired us. In this case, it's been deleted for the confidentiality of the client. But the user of the report may want to see that. They may want to see what the exact terms and conditions were of our engagement with maybe the person who's borrowing money from the bank. And then photographs. In this case, there were 20 pages of photographs at the end of this report. Now, I'm not going to show you the photographs for the purpose of confidentiality, but the capital items, we photographed them with their number so that someone can flip through the report and easily see item number 7 and relate it back to the capital item table. So this is an idea of what sort of work and the result of our work. We get hired by people who are trying to borrow from banks, credit unions, Caisse Populaires, the BDC. We get hired by people who are trying to sell a business, trying to buy a business. We get hired by people who have tax issues. We get hired by people who want to dissolve a business or settle a valuation question with respect to divorce, etc. So please give us a call if you have any other questions or you want to see a sample copy of one of our appraisals. Here's our phone number, and you can always reach us by web, by internet, and here's our website. And I really look forward to meeting you and talking with you and see if we can be of any help to you in the future. Thanks very much for watching, and we're going to have a bunch of other videos up as well that explain some of the processes and reasons behind the work that we do. Thank you.